Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In his article, The Case of the Obliging Stranger, William Gass is going to talk a good bit about moral principles, and these are a key component in what we can call moral theory or ethics as we typically understand it, and it's a term that gets used in a more popular sense. We talk about somebody having principles or following this principle or articulating a principle for a particular case, and he's going to talk about the oddness of applying these principles on the part of moralists, that is, people who have some sort of coherent moral theory, in something like the case of the obliging stranger, where, just to remind ourselves, somebody goes up to a stranger and says, "I need your help with an experiment. Would you follow me, please?" They hit him on the head with an axe. Effectively, they kill them or incapacitate him. They truss him up. They put him in an oven to cook him. So they are deceiving the person. They are killing the person. And they're also cooking the person. And then, of course, the experiment fails because they go off to play poker. And we should be able to say, yeah, that's wrong. Don't do that sort of thing. That's definitely the wrong thing to do. And then moralists will have all sorts of reasons, like, a hedonist might say, well, it produces more pain than pleasure. A Kantian might say, well, you cannot universalize the maxim of your action. Or perhaps they'll also say you're using the person as a mere means, not as an end. You're using the humanity of the person. And we could go down the line. And Gass says, you can do that. And moralists do, in fact, make those sort of claims with obvious cases, but they seem kind of weird, right? If you're using it to decide the case, that's even weirder to do. But what is a moralist attempting to do in that case? They're trying to articulate what is good in what is good that makes it good. Now, that may sound a little bit like confusing mouthful there. So good things, what is it that they have in common that actually makes them good things? Or we could say bad, or we could say right, or we could say wrong. Things must be understood in a very broad sense. It could be good actions, wrong actions, intentions, whatever it is that you're going to be judging. We want to be able to say, from the point of view of moral theory or ethics, well, what is it? How can we clarify what is it that makes things good or bad or wrong or right? And he is going to say that sometimes what ends up happening is that the moralists are going to, as he says, pursue principles which don't actually apply in these clear cases because they don't actually believe that they are clear cases. And so what does that actually mean? The moralist, as we've seen, is in kind of a weird, contradictory point of view. They do actually, in some level, think there are clear cases, and their moral theory is judged by that. But they also are using principles that don't seem to apply very well. Why? He says, well, it's a test of the clarity of cases that objections to them are objections in principle, that the principle applies as well to all cases as to any one, and these reasons for doubt devour themselves with equal right and the same appetite. That's why the moralist is really prepared to fight for the clear cases to the last ditch. And, when they're questioning them, they're doing so to demonstrate their philosophical breeding. So, they're
they're using principles in kind of a weird way, not exactly what they think they're up to there, or portray it to other people. And he's going to talk about cases where we actually do, in fact, use moral principles. So he says it's perfectly true that principles are employed in moral decisions. What kind of principles? He says popular principles. I mean like the Golden Rule and the laws of God. So, the laws of God would be something like, the Ten Commandments or a bunch of other precepts or something along those lines. We could think of other things. We could imagine a society that had become utilitarian in large part, where utilitarianism, the principles, which right now we could say are minority principles, would become popular principles, or a society that is driven by duty in a way that does justice to Immanuel Kant's strict notions of it. Okay, those would become popular principles, and we can find examples of that. And Gass says, yeah, you can do that. They often are going to get you into trouble. He says principles really obscure matters as often as they clear them up. And he's going to tell us why in just a moment. We're going to jump back to that. But we want to talk about how people get mixed up about what principles do, including moral theorists. So he highlights two mistaken points of view, or we could even say meta-principles, principles about principles. So one of these is thinking that principles really do decide cases. He thinks that in some clear cases, you don't need principles. You don't need the principle of utility or the categorical imperative or whatever else it is that you want to use in order to decide that what you did to the obliging stranger was wrong, or that 3 children being killed by a drunk driver is wrong and something should be done about it, right? So principles don't always decide cases. And another mistake that people think, you see this a lot in philosophy, a principle failing one case fails in all. So if you can come up with any sort of, they might say, defeater for it or exception, then you don't really have a universal principle. And Gass says, that's not really how we use principles. Principles are really summaries of what may be present generally in clear cases. He also has a nice analogy here. He says that principles state more or less prevalent identifying marks, like, so here's the analogy, cardinals, a certain kind of bird, usually nest in low trees, though there's nothing to prevent them from nesting elsewhere, and the location of the nest is not of the essence of the bird. So when I appeal to a principle, what am I appealing to? He says that I'm appealing to principles in cases with no direct decision, so they're not completely clear cases, and the principle is somehow relevant to helping me figure it out. That's as much as a principle can really do. So, things like the utilitarian approach, the, greatest happiness for the greatest number, Kant's categorical imperative, these are not really that helpful. Appealing to the laws of God in a divine command theory, probably not that helpful either. Why? Because, like he says, the laws of God don't cover everything. How many hours of television should I watch per night? What does the Bible say about that? Well, the Bible doesn't say anything about television, right? So that's, principles have to be understood, you might say, in a way that makes them less principle-y, less absolute than moral theorists typically take them as being. There's another aspect that's really important as well. So he says that we often have an attachment to principles, including very rational ethics professors, moral theorists, other people doing ethics as well, and that principles are often vehicles for especially powerful feelings, so we get invested in them. He's got this great little quip here: love me, love my maxims, love my principles, right? And he says, attack the principle and you attack the owner, their good name, their reputation, their sense of righteousness. So we have an emotional investment as well as a, sort of cognitive stance on the principles that we are preferring, that we've adopted, that we are saying are the ways to decide things. And he takes this as being sort of a ordinary case, not just for the plain person, the guy on the street, but for everybody, whether they realize it or not. So what ends up happening? Well, moral theories, they are elaborate systems. I mean, you can read entire books about them. You can get textbooks that run through each of them in turn, and they involve principles. Are these principles, as he says, derived from the purest vapors of the mind? No, they're derived from other things. Maybe they're inherited, but they also support his most cherished goods. And that's what we tend to do, whether they're popular principles. It's a dog-eat-dog world, got to look out for yourself. That's a moral principle of egoism. You hear people saying that sort of thing. You should always think of others when you're engaging in action. Well, that's a moral principle as well. So moral theories work with those. And he says, one thing that we really need to avoid is being too hasty in doing ethics. He says that ethics is about something, and in the rush to establish principles, to elicit distinctions from a recalcitrant language, and to discover laws, something is about to be overlooked and forgotten. What is it? This is how he's ending the piece. He says, those lovely things and honored people, those vile seducers and ruddy villains that our principles and laws are supposed to be based on, that they're supposed to be reflecting, we lose sight of that. We lose sight of the obliging stranger. We lose sight of the person doing wrong to the obliging stranger. We lose sight of the wrongness of the act in our rush to try to explain it away by using the very tools, the preferred tools, of moral philosophy. So this is where the case of the obliging stranger ends, suggesting to us that if we see principles in one way as, sort of rules of thumb that we whip out when we actually need them, we'll be okay. But if we try to do moral theory in a much more developed and uncompromising way, which is often how moral theorists want us to use their principles, we're actually going to be running into and generating problems for ourselves and probably for other people as well.